Howdy do, neighbor. It's Berean Spirits time once again. The boys have gathered around, and they're ready for you. So join in, make comments, and study with the guys as they try to study as the Bereans did in Acts chapter 17. And now, here's the guys.
Well, folks, spring had sprung, but it turned into a slinky, and it is falling down the stairs and getting cold again, man. But we are here on Berean Spirits, ready to bring the gospel to you guys. We appreciate everybody tuning in and listening. My name is Chris Peltz. I'm the evangelist with the Southside Church of Christ in Springfield, Missouri. We got Josh Thornhill over at the West Side Church of Christ in stormy Wichita, Kansas. How you doing there, Josh?
I'm good. We're not stormy right now, but we had a good storm the other day.
Yeah,
it was fun.
Absolutely. Yeah, we need the rain, so it's all good.
Yes, sir.
Richard Dotson with the Kearney Church of Christ, who's always putting up the links and inviting everybody to listen to the program. Richard, how you doing, man?
Well, the links are set.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I'm good. I'm here.
Yeah.
Another day, another dollar. All right. I guess that sounds kind of depressing.
I got you $1. Yeah. Yeah.
If I can get my cords all straightened out here, I think I'll be ready to go.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sounds good.
But it's, you said stormy, which it's stormy everywhere this week.
Yeah, I know it.
It's just been watching a lot of Ryan Hall, y'all. Been
Yes,
watching
sir.
a lot of him.
It's I think a testament, first of all, to two things. First of all, the technology that man has to be able to watch, predict, to kind of have an idea of where things are going to be and how good we've gotten at it. But and then on the flip side of that, how much further we really have to go, because even with all of that, storms were still popping up that they were totally surprised by. And unfortunately, there were several people that lost their lives because they did not expect, and things happened with storms and tornadoes that just completely out of the blue, right? And so it shows not only how good the technology has come, but also how far we've got to go with that as well. But it's
we had hail up here, not where I live, but just south of us. They're unbelievable how big the hail was. One piece they think is a world record size of a football.
Yeah.
Wow.
I mean, it's incredible how big some of that hail was.
Yeah, there were lots of reports of broken windshields on cars, and it's crazy.
Yeah. Well, it happens in the spring, right? Spring and winter have to fight it out every year.
Yeah.
So, yeah. And it's a fight, boy.
I know we're expecting snow here Sunday night into Monday morning.
No, don't tell me that.
I tell you, we are.
Oh no.
I know it.
That's not good.
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
A lot of snow or a little snow?
A little, but it's still, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Wow. Sounds like y'all are going to be a little bit chilly on Monday.
Wind chills close to 0, they said.
Oh, that's nice. That's just really nice.
So in Branson on Monday, it's a high of 39. Tuesday's high of 50 and Wednesday's high of 60. So y'all need to bundle up there, buddy.
Look at the high. Yeah, look at the lows though.
Yeah, like 22 is the low for the first day, Monday. A low of 24 on Tuesday, a low of 22 on Monday.
Yeah.
So yeah, bundle up, fellas.
Ah, man.
Well, now Chris and I've been down there when it's been bone chilling cold before.
That's right.
I mean, we're veterans. And what for those of us who are watching, my son's on spring break, and Chris, me, and my son are going to meet up Sunday evening, and we're going down to Branson, and we're going to go fishing Monday and Tuesday, and hopefully have a nice spring break. But
It's a winter break.
yeah, winter break.
Taking a break.
Josh was supposed to go, but he wimped out.
Mm-hmm.
He went and caught the trophy fish last year and decided that
I've retired.
yeah.
I've retired. Oh my goodness. All right. Well, let's get into the topic because we're gonna have to find some kind of tree to sacrifice to get a warm fire while we're down there.
Yeah.
So what kind of sacrifice are you? That is our topic of the day. We're going to be talking about how we live our lives and really what is important. What is the most valuable thing to us? And in several ways we could go with this, but I think really the crux of the study, the text will be Romans chapter 12, verses 1 and 2, which really lays it out how we are to present ourselves as a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God. He explains a little bit more in that particular text, saying that we're not to be conformed to this world, but transformed by the renewing of our mind. And I think it goes to the fact that when we offering ourselves as a living sacrifice, there is a contrast to the sacrifices that were offered under the Old Testament, but nevertheless, there is a sacrifice that is made, that is offered by Christians today, and it is ourselves. It is turning away from the world, the culture, the society, and the norms that the world says that we are to live by, and put Christ first in our lives. Right? That's ultimately what this is going to boil down to. But what does that look like? I think that's one of the biggest things we need to understand is what that looks like, and we see in part what it looks like through Christ. But Josh, when you think back even to the Old Testament sacrifices, there were so many, right? I mean, you got thousands of animals being sacrificed every week. I mean, people want to say every year, but ultimately it came down to every week, right? Because everyone was offering sacrifices throughout the week and bringing them to the priest to offer sacrifices throughout the week. And it certainly cost them something, right? I mean, that's why it was referred to as a sacrifice. It was supposed to cost them something, but they were also supposed to make it.
Yes. If you look back at the book of Leviticus, the first really 10 chapters, you get a picture of the various sacrifices that were offered. Chapter 1 starts with the burnt offering. Chapter 2 deals with the grain offering. Chapter 3 with the peace offering. Chapter 4 with the sin offering. Chapter 5, the guilt offering. All these different offerings that were made, and God gives instructions for how they were to be offered, for what they were supposed to do, and all the things that are associated with that. And I want to suggest that you cannot appreciate fully, at least, the sacrifice in the New Testament and any concept of sacrifice in the New Testament without going back to the Old Testament to understand what it is that sacrifice meant, what it looked like, all those things. Oh man, my mind just went blank. I guess I was just distracted by Richard's clock being an hour behind.
My what?
I said, I guess I was just distracted by Richard's clock being an hour behind.
Is it
But
really?
anyway, an interesting thought regarding the sacrifices. There you go, fellas, or our folks watching. Richard's clock is now up to date. Anyway, the interesting thing about the sacrifices of the Old Testament is, on many of them, the worshiper, the one offering the sacrifice, would slit the throat of the bull and then present it to the priest for the offering. And so, in essence, you're presenting a dead sacrifice. I mean, you've killed this animal and you're presenting it as a sacrifice. And as Chris pointed out, it's going to be at cost to you. I mean, that's your animal that you are offering. And God said, if you're poor, you can have a turtle doves or birds that you could offer in place of the bulls or the other animals. But the sacrifice is being offered. We come to the New Testament. Of course, Jesus is the sacrifice for us. Christ, our Passover lamb, 1 Corinthians 5 tells us. We have many references to the fact that Jesus died for us, or that he offered himself as the sacrifice for sin. But then, as Chris referenced, we're told in Romans 12, verse 2, that we are presenting, or verse 1 particularly, we're presenting ourselves as a living sacrifice. We're not slitting the bull's throat and passing it off to the priest. Paul says, you are the sacrifice. And you're not setting yourself upon an altar to sacrifice yourself. He says, your life is the sacrifice, not in the sense that you're taking your life, but you're giving your life to Jesus so that it can be surrendered to him, so that you're not conformed to this world, but transformed by the renewing of your mind. And so we see parallels between the sacrifices of the Old Testament to the New Testament. And the fact is, we need to appreciate that we are the sacrifice that God wants, that God wants us to give everything that we are to him to faithfully serve him. You're muted, Chris, by the way. Chris, you're muted. You're still
muted.
Something's going on here.
Oh.
He sounds really good. But...
He does. It's the best I've ever heard him. It's so clear. You know, we're going to have Chris for a gospel meeting next week. In fact, he's coming back with me from fishing, and if he preaches this good, man, I tell you what, it's going to be fantastic. Now we still can't hear you, Chris. There you go.
Oh man. So Romans chapter 12 really illustrates very much, that the idea of being that sacrifice, right? For those who give generously, those who serve with, with everything you've got, weep with those who weep, rejoice with those who rejoice, and preferring one another. I mean, there's so many things that is talked about in Romans chapter 12 that goes against culture, goes against society, that is countercultural. You could refer to it. And the point being that we're doing this with our lives. Our focus is on God, glorifying God and serving others. The world says we want to be served, and Christ says he didn't come to serve or to be served, but to serve. And we follow his example. And in Hebrews chapter 10, in verse 4, he tells us that it was impossible for the blood of bulls and goats to take away sin. But you look at what Christ did and the sacrifice that he made in Hebrews chapter 10, verses 8 through 10, and how, he was that sacrifice offered once for all, right? It wasn't a something done every week, every day, every year. It was something that was done once, that accomplished all of these things through his sacrifice and him dying on the cross, being buried, and rose the third day. And now we, as his children, as God's people, we come and we offer ourselves that living sacrifice, right? We and that ultimately, I think, is seen in the service. He who is least is the greatest in the kingdom, as Jesus taught as well. So, Richard, when you look at this idea of this living sacrifice, as Josh pointed out, there's so many contrasts from the Old Testament, because it's not the slitting of a throat of an animal and giving it to the priest to offer, but rather it is a life that we live.
Oh yeah. And the contrast that you're making, between the old and the new was pointed out by Jesus, I think, in the Sermon on the Mount. He would say, "You have heard," a lot of times, and then he'd say, "But I say unto you," and I believe what he's really trying to get across to us is this is what a living sacrifice looks like. For instance, in Matthew 5, he starts off verse 38 talking about retaliation. He goes, "You've heard it was said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth." But starts in verse 39, and he starts giving you a different way of looking at this. And he sums that up in verse 43. You shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy is what you've heard. But he says, I say, love your enemies, bless those who curse you, do good to those who hate you, and pray for those who spitefully use you and persecute you. There has always been a need, or a perceived need by man, to get retaliation for those who slight them or hurt them. But part of being a sacrifice, what Jesus is trying to point out, is that you give yourselves totally to his service. And I think that was displayed by Stephen in Acts 7, when he was persecuted and eventually stoned. He said the same thing that Jesus said, don't lay this sin to their charge. He was more concerned about their welfare, even though they were targeting him and hurting him and taking his life from him. He was more concerned about their eternal state. And he knew, for instance, that it's a fearful thing to fall into the hands of a living God. He did not want that to happen to them. And so basically, the way I perceive what Stephen is saying is, he's saying, Lord, be patient with them. Maybe they'll come around. Don't take your anger out on them because of what's happening to me. And he was willing to sacrifice himself so that he could possibly have some type of influence to help them become, more spiritually inclined, which we do see. The Apostle Paul, who was called Saul at that time, was holding the coats of those people who stoned him. And so we know the rest of the story of the Apostle Paul. We know what took place. So we can see then that patience, the Lord holding back his anger, it did have an effect. And Stephen was willing to sacrifice himself to be not just he was a living sacrifice. He was willing to give of himself in order to be able to grow the kingdom. And that's the way we have to look at ourselves. We have to look at ourselves as being expendable. We have to look at ourselves as a tool for the Lord, and that if we can be used for good, then use us for good. And we have to be willing not to think the way they used to think or the way man wants to think, but to think the way Christ thought, the way Christ showed us to think. And in so doing, we are called a living sacrifice, which, according to Romans 12, is our reasonable service. And I think it's reasonable because that's the type of service that our Lord showed us to do.
Yeah. And sometimes our ambition gets in the way of that, right? We end up not being a living sacrifice for God, but sacrificing God for a life that is of this world, for a life that is of the corporate, climbing the corporate ladder of having possessions of the things that the world says we need to have or do or think. and so we get that backwards, right? We have things that we want to do, accomplish, have, possess, and the pat on the back from those around us. And unfortunately, even as you were referring there in Matthew chapter 5, Richard, with the Sermon on the Mount, even there he talks about, just kind of loving and praising those that you know and like. Is do not the tax collectors do the same, and the heathens do the same, but we are to love our enemies, as was pointed out, which is again countercultural. So the idea of being that living sacrifice, first and foremost, as we've talked about several times on this program, requires that we are focused on God, on the eternal purpose of God, and the salvation of the souls of not only ourselves but of the souls of men as well. And so, Josh, we get an idea of what it looks like, right? We get an idea of the service that we are to do when it comes to, first and foremost, putting souls above everything else. But how serious is it if we don't? I mean, what do we find in the scriptures that really lays out any consequences for those who are not making the proper sacrifice?
Well, the consequences are severe. I mean, if we just boil it down, the consequences are severe. We can see that from a very practical standpoint. If you just look at the Old Testament and the way, we were studying in our Wednesday night class on Leviticus right now. One of the fellows is teaching through Leviticus. He does a great job and really interesting study that we're involved in there. But, last night we were talking about chapter 23, where God goes through the various feasts that Israel was to observe. And part of that is a reminder of who they were. There were sacrifices involved in that, but it was a reminder of who they were, that they had been redeemed. They had been set free from their bondage of Egypt. They've been not just redeemed. I preached on the Exodus a couple, beginning of last month. That Exodus served as the identity of Israel. I mean, go throughout the Old Testament and just notice how often God says, I am the God who brought you out of Egypt, or in some way references the fact that they are the people who have been redeemed from their Egyptian bondage. And so it serves as their identity. And so these feasts that God had prescribed were an effort to allow them an opportunity to remind themselves or to focus upon who they were and who God was. And so you look at several of the examples throughout the Old Testament. Cain, for instance, he offers a sacrifice that was not pleasing to God, and he was condemned for it. You look at Nadab and Abihu in Leviticus chapter 10. They offered strange fire. They offered fire from a source that God had not authorized, and so God struck them dead right there on that occasion. And that seems harsh to us. But when we look at the instruction, or what God tells Moses to tell Aaron in verse 3 of Leviticus 10, he says, by those who come before me, I will be treated as holy. And I've noticed, as I've been reading through, that verse, or that phrase, is actually used multiple times. I was actually reading that this morning in the book of Numbers, when Moses is told to speak to the rock, and yet he strikes it twice. God says, because you did not treat me as holy, you will not enter the promised land. And so we find the sacrifices that people in the Old Testament were offering, if they weren't offered with a proper heart, if they were offered just, thoughtlessly and just kind of going through the motions, if they weren't offered in the manner in which God wanted them to be offered, they were rejected. And sometimes the consequences were extremely severe, like Nadab and Abihu, Leviticus chapter 10. And so when we come to the New Testament, read the book of Hebrews, everything about the covenant of Christ is better. He's the better messenger. He's the better apostle. He's the better priest. He's the better sacrifice. He's, everything is better. And then he makes that point in chapter 10. If you rejected the law of Moses, you died without mercy on the testimony of 2 or 3 witnesses. Of how much worse punishment will he be thought worthy who has trampled underfoot the Son of God? And so as far as this living sacrifice, the consequences aren't any less severe. And so we have to remember that God is not interested in the physical sacrifice, but he's interested in us. We could summarize that very succinctly, like Jesus does. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, and with all your strength. Funny, I'd actually read that this morning too. Anyway, when we boil it down to that, it kind of emphasizes the kind of sacrifice that we are. And I know this has a negative connotation to it in today's culture, because we think about the jealous husband or the jealous boyfriend or whatever, or the jealous girlfriend in a negative light. But God is a jealous God, not in the same way, in some ways that we might think of in a negative sense, but God demands to be preeminent. He demands that he is first, that he is our first love. And you can read many passages in the New Testament, like 2 Thessalonians 1, 8 and 9, that show that God will take vengeance on those who do not obey the gospel and who do not know God. And so we want to be that living sacrifice where everything that we are is surrendered to the will of God, so that we can enjoy his good pleasure.
Go ahead, Richard.
Yeah, I wanted to make a comment about Nadab and Abihu and the punishment seeming harsh. I am not so sure it is harsh.
I agree.
Because when you go to Romans chapter 12, go back again, and we mentioned it earlier. And when it talks about us as living sacrifice, it says it is our reasonable service. Well, why is it reasonable? Well, I think the first point being is the fact that there is a recognition between who is the creator and who has been created. And God is God, and I'm not him. So I need to look at what I need to do to serve him instead of what he does to serve me. And, that gets into that story, Chris, I've told you about this, the story of the chicken and the pig getting together for breakfast. And the chicken had an idea. He said, you supply the bacon, I'll supply the eggs. And the pig thought about it a minute, and he said, no, that's not fair. He goes, I'm making a commitment. You're making a contribution. And so many times when we look back at some of the things that God has said to us and that he wants, we only want to make a contribution to the cause many times because we're not committed to pleasing God. We're not committed to being a living sacrifice. And when God tells you something that he wants, all of nature obeys. But yet man seems to think that, no, I don't have to obey. And I want to give you, we talked about this Sunday at church. I want to give you an example of this. If me and Josh go out for lunch and we decide to order dessert, and let's say Josh gets up to use the restroom, he'll say, Richard, order me a piece of peach cobbler. And I ordered chocolate cake. He gets back, there's chocolate cake at the table, and he's going to say, what's this? And I'm going to say, well, I know you ordered peach cobbler, but you'll like this better. Trust me. Well, but that's not what he wanted. And someone who has the proper respect toward God is going to listen to what God says, is going to listen to what God likes, and they're going to look to please him. And so if God says, in essence, this is where I want the fire to come from, to Nadab and Abihu, if their respect had been proper, they would have obeyed. But they didn't do that. And we can go through example after example after example where man, in essence, was trying to force feed chocolate cake down to the Lord when he'd ordered peach cobbler. And we see it even today as well when you see people offering, using musical instruments in their worship to God. When God tells you exactly what kind of music he likes. You know, he likes to hear psalms, hymns, and spiritual songs. He likes to hear them sung, you know, from the heart. But yet man tries to build on that, thinking that if it pleases man, it's going to be pleasing to God. And again, you're offering God chocolate cake when he ordered peach cobbler. If our respect to God is as it should be, then we're going to pay heed to what he tells us that he wants, and we're going to sacrifice in order to give him that.
You know, it's interesting with the singing. The book of Hebrews even refers to that as a sacrifice, offering the sacrifice of praise, that is the fruit of our lips.
Mm-hmm.
So I just found that interesting to put. Sorry to interrupt. Go ahead.
1 Peter 2:5, you know, we are as living stones being built up a spiritual house, a holy priesthood to offer up spiritual sacrifices acceptable to God through Jesus Christ. Acceptable. Not all spiritual sacrifices are acceptable to God. And you're going to have to go through Jesus Christ to find out which ones are. And so again, I mean, it goes back again. I mean, I got to respect the will of God if I am a living sacrifice. I can't sit there and say, I know, God, you said you wanted this, but you're going to like this better because I do. You know, that's the same as the chicken wanting to make a contribution instead of being committed. You know, we want to include ourselves in on the benefits of the sacrifice instead of looking just solely to be pleasing to God. And you know, that's not going to get somebody saved.
You know, I was thinking about David for a minute with what you guys both were talking about, and what we mentioned earlier about it costing us something. And David went to offer a sacrifice, and when he gets to someone's place, you know, they're like, "Here, have this. Here, take this. You know, I'll give it to you." And David's like, "No. That's not. This has to cost me something. I will buy it, but I'm not going to just offer someone else's stuff." And that's what a lot of times we end up doing, right? People will offer their families, they destroy their families, you know, in trying to, you know, move along in whether it's work or other endeavors, or these other things are sacrificed rather than themselves, rather than going without, rather than doing, you know, without things of this world in order to serve God and put God first. And when we put God first, then what we're going to do is we're going to put others before ourselves. Philippians chapter 2, for example, and Matthew 22, right? The first and great commandment is to love your neighbor or to love the Lord God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. The second, like it, is this: to love your neighbor as yourself. And so, you know, we're going to put others ahead of ourselves. That just as Christ did, right? He served others. We should have this mind in us that was also in Christ, as Philippians 2 points out, so that we would serve others ahead of think of the things of others ahead of the things of ourselves. And so that's part of what this idea of being that living sacrifice entails. And when we're not doing that, there are going to be great consequences. And it may be, right, that, yeah, maybe we don't see the consequences here and now like you know, Aaron saw with his sons of Nadab and Abihu, Moses, you know, being spoke to directly by God in Numbers chapter 20, and other accounts that y'all referenced. But you know, on the day of judgment, right, when we stand before Christ and the judgment seat, you know, and others, right? You were so busy doing all of this, and these other people who are lost because, you know, they're like, wait a minute, you knew what I needed to do, and you didn't say anything. You never even gave me the opportunity. And then we stand before Christ, and he's like, well, what do you have to say about that? But, I was too busy with other things. I didn't sacrifice the things of this world in my life in order to serve you. That's the answer, whether we would admit it or not. That's the answer. And the question is, what kind of sacrifice are you? Are you a living sacrifice for God, or are you one that is offering sacrifices of others in order to serve yourself in a worldly manner?
Can I make an illustration?
Go for
In the New Testament, and Jesus even brought this up even in Matthew 18 about a brother who sins against you. There are times when there are faults that take place between brethren. Sometimes it's not just a sin against the brother. Sometimes it can be just sin in general. And we have instructions on how to deal with this. In Matthew 18 is a good example of how to deal with the brother who sins against you. You go to him. Well, too many times, and I've seen in too many places, brethren who are willing to sacrifice the souls of those whose lives are in jeopardy because they've sinned against God, and they don't go talk to him. And the reason they don't go talk to him, and it becomes painfully clear, is they don't want to sacrifice their relationship with that person on this earth because they're afraid they might offend them. Now, that's not a living sacrifice. A living sacrifice is one who is going to do the will of God, even if it costs them a relationship on this earth with a loved one. And they're going to go to them, and they're going to do exactly what God wants them to do. And the reason's clear. God gave us the example of what a sacrifice is. He went to the cross. He gave up his life to do what? To save souls. And we, if we are committed to that cause, not making a contribution, if we're committed to that cause, then we're going to be willing to do the same thing that Jesus did. And we're going to be willing to sacrifice whatever on this earth, it doesn't matter what it is, to be able to get other people to go to heaven. That's what Stephen did in Acts chapter 7. He was willing to give up his life in order for other people to go to heaven. And, and now, does that sound like a tall order? Yes, it is. But we cannot call ourselves brethren with Jesus if we're not committed to the same cause. We have to be committed to his cause and always be looking at the overall goal and not being getting caught up on the things that's going to affect us obtaining the goal. In other words, let's not choke on the gnats. Let's keep our eye on the goal. And the goal is to get somebody to go to heaven. So, if someone slights us in some way, we're not looking for retaliation. We're looking toward, what can I do at this point to help them make their lives right with God so that they can go to heaven? That's the goal. And that's what we got to be committed to if we're a living sacrifice.
Go ahead, Josh.
And I think it related to this. You find in Romans 6, verse 17 and 18, Paul says that you're a slave of somebody. I think one of the things that people don't like about this whole sacrifice business and how we're a living sacrifice and we're surrendering ourselves to God, they don't like being a servant. And yet, Paul says you're a slave of somebody. There's no other option. You're either a slave of sin or you're a slave of Christ. You're a slave of righteousness. And so the question is, which taskmaster are you going to choose? Are you going to choose the one that's burdensome? Or are you going to choose the one whose yoke is easy and his burden is light? There's a book I think it's like you can just barely see the bottom of it right there, that teal thing right there. He's going through Psalm 23 and considering the psalm in light of an actual shepherd. And he describes in that book at one point there was a neighboring farm, and he says the ground was famished, and he remembers the sheep standing by the fence in these wistful knots, looking longingly at his green pastures, as opposed to the barren pastures that they were given to graze upon. And that there's your two choices. Are you going to serve the master who's going to leave you barren and empty and hungry and destitute, or are you going to choose the master that loves you and will bless you and nourish you and cherish you and serve you? And I think sometimes we can tend to compartmentalize parts of our life where we say, I've got my church life, I've got my work life, I've got my family life. And, in many ways, the work life and the family life doesn't overlap. And to a degree, there's a good thing there. But then is there overlap between your church life and your work life, or your church life and your family life? And what God is trying to say is, I want all of it. I want to reign over all of it. I want you to surrender all of it to me and let me rule over every area of your life. And so that's what God desires of us. Are we willing to do that, or are we going to continue to serve ourselves and to serve sin? We've already talked about the consequences are great when you choose not to, but there are tremendous blessings when you choose to surrender yourself to God. It's worth it. It's surely worth it. And so the choice is for us to make, and God's going to accept us if we'll make that proper choice, but he will allow us to suffer the consequences if we don't.
Absolutely. Yeah. Richard, you got any last thoughts for us today?
No, I'm done.
Josh, you got anything else you want to add?
Those are my last thoughts. So.
Yeah. Folks, we really do appreciate everybody who tunes in and listens, and we hope that you'll give these give this some serious thought in how it is you're living your life, what it is the most important thing to you, what you're in how you live, what are you demonstrating to those around you and to God, that means the most to you. Is it a life of service to God, or a life of service to the thoughts and means of this world, which ultimately, the Satan is the prince of this world. He is the ruler of this world. And when we serve this world, we're serving him rather than serving others and serving God. And so, who is it, as Josh pointed out, are you going to serve? Even Jesus in Matthew chapter 6 points out, right? You cannot serve two masters, right? You're going to serve one, right, and despise the other, but you're going to serve something. And the question is, what is that going to be? And we hope and we pray that you will serve God above all else and offer yourself as a living sacrifice. Until next time, remember to search the scripture.
Wait. I want to tell everybody, Chris is going to preach a meeting here. He's going to be preaching a meeting here at Kearney next week, and we're going to try to live stream it. So that'll be on Friday night, 7:00. Be watching for that. Probably the best channel to look at right now is Chris's. Yeah, be watching for that. You can see it Friday and Saturday live stream. Won't be doing it Sunday, but we will live stream it. Try to live stream it Friday and Saturday, so be watching for that.
Yeah.
Is that the 20th and the 21st?
Yep.
I don't know.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is.
7 p.m. Central Time.
Until next time, remember to search the scriptures with Berean spirits.
Well, folks, that's all for today. Don't worry. Lord willing, the guys will be back next week for another Bible study on Berean spirits. Until then, let the guys hear from you. drop them some email at bereanspirits@gmail.com. They'd love to hear from you. Until next time, let's keep studying that Bible.